I have a comment that has been sent
Oh,
in that I would like to read to you to get started. This is going to tie everything together. So this comes to us from Mr. Gil Moore. So this is the drummer and singer from Triumph. These guys have sold like 40 million albums, and he's the owner of Metalworks that we just talked about. So this is what Gil Moore has to say about one Kevin Dietz. He says, Kevin is one of the very best engineers and producers out there. At Metalworks, we're extremely proud of him, and he deserves the success he's achieved. He's one of the hardest working guys I've seen in the field. And on top of that, and most importantly, he's a solid citizen, an all-around nice guy. So that's Gilmore from Triumph.
wow.
How does that make you feel on a Sunday morning?
Well, I'll say thank you, Gil, for that. If he ends up checking out this episode, that's some very kind words. Like you mentioned. Well, I went to school at Metalworks, and I ended up working there for 7.5 years, and continued to do a lot of work for years after that there. So Metalworks is a big part of my story, how I got my start in everything related to this. So that's quite a huge compliment to hear words like that, and I'm grateful to I'm grateful for that.
That's awesome. So let's start by breaking down the various roles that people play in the studio. So again, our listeners love music. They're
Yeah,
listening to music, they're going to live concerts, but they're not sure exactly who does what in the studio. So
yeah.
I guess we could just quickly break it down to what is an assistant engineer, an engineer, a producer, the mixing engineer, and then the mastering engineer. Maybe those five
Ooh,
just quickly, you don't
yeah.
have to go super in depth. This isn't a master class or whatever.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
But just if you can go through them and people will go, oh, okay, that's what people are up to back there.
Well, yeah. Generally, when you start out, an entry level position at a recording studio would be an assistant, or oftentimes they can be two different positions, but it's often referred to as a runner, and that's basically just someone who does the basic assistant duties. Very little technical demand in that position. The runner is basically like the gopher, kind of handling the chores, getting people's food, any little things that they need that would take away from the the technical work being done. And that's often kind of like blurred with assistant engineer. They're often like synonymous, and sometimes you do both. But the assistant essentially, well, it's like the title says, you assist the session. So outside engineers and producers will come in, and you're the house person at the studio who knows the room, knows where all the cables are kept, which microphones are around, where all the stands are, and the producer and engineer will direct you for what they want on a session and what they want the setup to be, and you will do that. You'll be their right hand individual to take care of all that. So it's actually it's a demanding job because you're constantly on your toes with different people and different personalities. You often have to juggle a number of things at the same time. Oh, we want to set up for this. This person's coming in at this time. We also need to order lunch. Can you also talk to the studio manager to see if we can get this for tomorrow? So you have to be organized, pay attention, attentive, and anticipate the needs of the client ahead of time. You sort of want to be very proactive in that in that position, and you're also the first one in and the last one out
I was
on
just gonna
a
ask,
day.
would the assistant get there long before everyone else and set up mics and set up things generally to save
Yeah,
time, because time is money, and at a big studio it costs a lot per hour.
yeah. I mean, it varies depending on the session, how far in advance you have to come in, and how late you'll be staying after. But absolutely, one thing that's guaranteed is you're the first one in and the last one out.
And the assistant engineer position is important for someone new, because if the engineer, the producer, the record label, if they can't trust you as the assistant engineer to remember things and to be reliable, to show up on time, you're never going to progress to the other positions as well. So it seems
Absolutely.
like, oh, I'm at the start of this. How do I work my way up? But it's actually a very important position, and it helps to save time and make the sessions run smoothly.
Yeah, if the assistant engineer is doing their job and doing it well, then the session is very transparent and runs extremely smoothly. If they're not, it can be a disaster. So it's one of the most important positions in the studio, definitely.
Mm. So then after that, we have the engineer, and that's more the technical side of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty smooth transition between the two, to be honest. It's basically when you become a staff engineer, you're an assistant engineer that just has years of experience, where now you're able to kind of get in the driver's seat, if you will. So you spend all this time assisting people and learning the ropes and going, oh, okay, and just observing. I did mention that it's, there's a fair amount of responsibility with the position, but they're also in many ways, you get to learn without like the burden of everything being on your shoulders. So
that's kind of nice, actually.
Yeah, once you get everything set up and you're doing your job, I mean, if the engineer on the session, that like the dedicated engineer or producer, whoever on the session, they're mainly responsible to the band. So once you take care of your thing on your side, you sort of get to just maintain everything and just make sure everything is running smoothly, and learn from the individuals that you're working with. So oftentimes you're really busy at the beginning of the session, busy throughout with little things, busy at the end because you've got to tear everything down and back everything up and put everything away. But there's long periods of time where you're just on standby, ready for any little changes that have to happen. But the bulk of the work is done. So at that point, you get to just sit back and observe and learn. And that's the key. You have to put in a lot of time to get that experience, but you do that. That's what someone in my position does. And then you become a full-fledged engineer, and one day they go, oh, now someone's coming in on the weekend. Okay, you're going to do that session, just you, and you do that. You go from there.
Can you remember the first time that you were officially the engineer, where they said, actually, you are the engineer and there's going to be an assistant coming in to help you? Can you remember that at all, that transition moment?
I don't remember exactly like when it would be you're the engineer and there's an assistant coming to help you. But I do remember in summer of 2008, I was the assistant on Placebo. The band from the UK came to Metalworks for, it was like 9 weeks, all of July, all of August, and a week in September. And they were doing an album called Battle for the Sun. And I was the assistant. There was a dedicated engineer, a dedicated producer, and I was the assistant. It was a great session, huge learning opportunity. And it was running Monday to Friday, and the occasional Saturday, but it was mostly just Monday to Friday. And someone came in on the weekend, and you remember Metalworks Studio 2? It was... two guys came in. They were doing like some acoustic guitar and cajon and vocals and whatever, and it was me. I just came in by myself on the weekend and did the thing with those guys. I remember that being one of the I may have done like a vocal with someone before or whatever, but that one I remember. And then further down the line, there would be the opportunity for, on bigger sessions, someone will come in, an intern or whoever, and they would be my assistant.
So then the engineer is doing more of the technical stuff, where they're the hands-on on the computer with Pro Tools or whatever software they're using. They're making sure that the the sound of that they're getting from the mics are what they want. So it's more the technical of the audio, and then after that, the producer is more a specific sound that they're looking for. Is that?
Well, yeah. Again, it's kind of like a blurry line, because especially in this day and age, you often end up producing, engineering, mixing. It's all, a lot of it is all very blurry these days. But essentially, yeah, your primary job as a recording engineer is to make sure that things are technically correct. But also when the producer says, yeah, we really want to go for this kind of a sound, it's generally the engineer that then goes, okay, so we'll use these kind of microphones. Why don't we set up like this? And why don't we do a thing like this? And so the job of an audio engineer is really to use in my opinion, the job is to use the gear and all that, your technical know-how, to be a conduit to capture the artistic intent of the artist, the producer, and so on.
Now, for the producer, a lot of times there's these amazing producers that have a track record of success. So a major label that's spending $1 million on a new artist that they have an investment, they want to ensure that they make their money back. They find producers that have worked with, that have produced all these platinum artists. So there's a track record of, okay, well, we bring this guy in, he knows how to get the best out of a band. He knows what sells and what doesn't. And he's our best bet, our best guarantee to get a product that's marketable and we can recoup our money and make a profit. What would you say are the roles of a producer when it comes to music in the studio? And there are different kinds of producers, and we can go over that as well.
Well, that's right. There are different kinds of producers. It's basically, I don't know. I liken it to a producer is a lot like the director of a film is how I see it. They're kind of like the high level, pay attention to everything. Oftentimes the producer is responsible for the budget of the entire thing. So they have to oversee the studio costs and any incidentals and hiring other musicians and gear rental or whatever the case may be.
The scheduling of the studio time and...
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, all of that. So there is just a purely organizational aspect to being a producer. And then there's an artistic aspect, which is a big range as well. You can be, I guess ultimately your job is to make tangible the vision of the artist and make their songs the best they can be in recorded form. But also a lot of producers are very hands-on and they'll dig into the music itself. Some producers are less so, and there's a middle ground there too. So it really runs the gamut of like you yourself said, there's like a range of producers and their different styles and how they do all that. So it's a big and then of course, and then if we're talking about hip hop, the term producer means something different. The producer is often like the beat maker in hip hop, the person who
like
actually creates exactly. Yeah. The person who actually like creates the music that the artist then raps over or collaborates with to then do their thing. So, there are producers that are also songwriters. So they will also, Max Martin would be an example of that. So it's a really broad range.
And an example of a very hands-off kind of Zen producer would be Rick Rubin, one of the greatest of all time. Yeah. He's more like he's just in there feeling the vibes and somehow knows what to say and what to do to get the artist back into the place they were when they were making their best music, or it's like he
Mm-hmm.
drops in a suggestion like, oh, what do you think if and then it gets the band thinking differently and they go in. Would he be the best example of a very hands-off, like he's just in the room lying on a couch? And I'm probably
I think
generalizing,
so.
but yeah.
No, I think so. From everything I've heard, those accounts are fairly true, but obviously it's some people don't like it. I don't know. In an interview, I remember seeing a clip of Corey Taylor from Slipknot saying, he's like, "That's not what I consider a producer, what they're supposed to be doing." And I guess they did something with Rick Rubin, and that's where that
I
came
think
up.
their third album, Volume 3, the Sublime. What's funny, I just bought Slipknot tickets and I just listened to the entire
Nice.
discography. So I think it
Yeah.
was album number 3. So now album number
Interesting.
1 and 2 were like insanity, like song
That's
structures all
Ross
over the
Robinson.
place. Yeah,
Yeah.
so no harmonies, like just chaos. And then volume 3 is where they start to have those hit singles with big choruses and structures and melodies and
Yeah.
acoustic guitars. And that was the Rick Rubin coming in, and
Interesting.
less critically acclaimed, that album, than a lot of the ones before it and afterwards. And maybe
It's
that's where
such a good
Corey
album, though.
Taylor. Yeah, that's my
Yeah.
favorite Slipknot songs come from their least critically acclaimed albums. So I don't like those albums the most as a whole, but the singles themselves are the strongest on the ones that are less critically acclaimed. So whatever that
I
means.
agree.
Yeah.
Well, Rick Rubin also, again, from what I understand, he definitely, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but he relies on. If you look at the lineage of all these amazing engineers and producers that have come from the Rick Rubin camp, Dave Schiffman, Sylvia Massey, Ryan Hewitt, Andrew Sheps, on and on. Rick Rubin always employs excellent recording engineers, and so there's Paul Gross, the former studio manager of Metalworks and former owner of Phase One Studios. Legend. He was the manager while for most of the time while I was there at Metalworks before he retired, and he once said to me, he said the way to get a great sound, a great recording, is hire great people, work with great musicians, great artists. If you want to sound better, work with better people. And he meant, like, obviously musically, yeah, or technically or whatever. And he was absolutely right. So, I think Rick Rubin knows this, and he goes, well, I'm gonna, hire, who's the best engineer in LA right now? I'll hire them. And so
that allows him the freedom.
That's an ace in up his sleeve. You know what I mean? Yeah, exactly. That's a good way of putting it. It allows him the freedom to be the Zen guru and just focus on the music and focus on the artistic aspects of it, and that's what he contributes to the band. So I know a lot of people are critical of his style, but how can you argue with his with his thing? He worked with everyone from the Dixie Chicks to Johnny Cash to
Slayer,
Tom Petty to Slayer
Peppers,
to Slipknot,
yeah.
System of a Down, Chili Peppers. You can't really argue. Danzig. You can't argue with that. So I dig it. He's a very interesting character, and I'm always interested in what he's up to.
So before we dive into what mixing is and what mastering is, to wrap up this kind of intro, what do you think are the qualities that someone like a Rick Rubin has, where regardless of genre, regardless of artist or band, and this, again, he's spanning everything from country to hip hop to metal. He's got, your Jay-Z's and your Beastie Boys and like all these. Yeah. So what do you think it is? It's just his understanding of music as a whole. Like how can someone be so great without being specific to just, they're great at metal or great at country?
Well, I mean, good music is good music, right? And we see this now more than ever. Do you remember a time being a young kid or a teenager or whatever, when you kind of had to like pick a type of music that you liked, and if you were a rock guy, you weren't supposed to like hip hop, and if if you were into metal, you couldn't like you couldn't go to what was it, was the Lilith Fair or something like that, or whatever, you
can't wear your Taylor Swift shirt at the Metallica show.
You can't like both, it's kind of like pick a side. And that I remember noticing a change in that trend, where I had all these friends in metal bands out in Hamilton, and they were like, oh man, I can't wait for OVO Fest, and they went every year. And I love that kind of mentality. People, good music is good music. And you can debate you could debate the merits of pop music versus I don't know, something else, some folky singer songwriter who is who has very deep lyrics and very emotional, versus someone who's just making like basically a party track. But if it sounds good, and if it gets you going, if it gives you a reaction in one way or another, then who's to say, right? So good music is good music, and I think now more than ever, especially with genres blending and people really stretching out in that regard, I think more than ever people are open to so many different types of music. So now, obviously, that was Rick Rubin way back. So I think he's just one of these people that's a music lover, and maybe he just has an ear for talent. When he was doing LL Cool J back in the day, he was like, this guy is amazing, and he just hears someone who's amazing, and the talent gets him excited. I'm just hypothesizing, but I would imagine that's the case. And or Beastie Boys, and then he hears Slayer, and he goes, these guys are ferocious. I can get behind this. Because he sees someone excelling at their thing, right? And that's the beauty of it.
I'm always saying that the good music is good music. So, for example, I wouldn't say that, country is my favorite genre, but there have been some years where just my favorite albums of the year were from country artists. Like you had your Zac Brown bands and your Rascal Flatts and Keith Urban.
Keith Urban.
You have
fantastic
these country artists, Chris Stapleton. You got these amazing guys and girls. And I always break it down to, if you took any of those albums, say a Chris Stapleton album, and you stripped it down to just guitar and vocals, the essence of the song, and then you had like Metallica cover that album, but as Metallica, it would be a great album. And if you had, I don't know, the Black Album from Metallica, and it was played completely by Chris Stapleton, it would be amazing. So to me, great music is great music regardless of genre, but we do sometimes have preferences where I gravitate towards acoustic singer-songwriters, alternative rock, metal, and less say jazz and less say country or whatever. So we do have our kind of, go-tos from growing up, maybe.
Oh, of course, and there's nothing wrong with that. Your preferences are going to be your preferences, but it's I think a true fan of music is going to be open to music as a whole. It's just so out of step these days to bash on music. Like it's almost cringy when you hear someone go, oh, I remember seeing an article circulating, and people were posting on a Facebook about, it was like the man who ruined music, and it was about Max Martin, and I thought, are you crazy?
Yeah.
Like I thought that was just I just thought it was ignorant, and I'm like, you may not like the music he makes, but are you gonna deny its impact? And I mean, the funny thing is, he comes from a metal background, and Shellback, his prodigy, the young guy that he's been working with for years, again, comes from like a hardcore background. So they're doing, they're producing all this pop stuff together, and then Shellback goes and produces, I think, a few tracks off of, I don't know if the whole thing, but refuse their like comeback album.
Wow.
So I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. And I've actually worked with a few producers who have like a metal background, and they do pop stuff like nobody's business. So there might be something there, which or maybe it's just people that are very open, just very open to music. Whatever it is, I'm into it. So I don't dig on the musical snobbery. I was there at one point when I was younger. If there was a point in time when, if it wasn't old school like hardcore punk rock or industrial music, I didn't want to hear about it. And years later, I discovered albums from that time that I wasn't interested in because all I wanted to listen to was Misfits and Skinny Puppy. And I look back and I go, oops, I missed that album. And now, albums that I love now that I was like, oh, I just refused to pay attention because it had horns in it or something. And I only wanted, distortion on everything at that time.
Do you think maybe what it is for those that have been in metal bands that have gone on to do great pop stuff? Do you think it's that with metal, they found a way, despite not having hooks and not having certain things, to make great albums and great songs? And it's like they get a whole new bag of tools where they're not pigeonholed into this one corner. You got to work with just this if you're truly metal. Maybe they feel this freedom of using every trick of the trade, every tool in the toolbox. Do you think that has anything to do with the metal to everything else?
It could be. It really.
Let us
really
speculate.
Let us speculate. It very well could be. Although, all my favorite metal from back in the day definitely has hooks. I would say if I had to pick a favorite metal album of all time, I'd go with Master of Puppets. And there's hooks all over that thing. Even Slayer, which is like, melodically is very monotone. The hooks are in the guitar riffs and everything. So there are still hooks in there. And now modern metal, things like Slipknot or Killswitch Engage or, on and on and on. That stuff is like so hooky. There's tons of stuff in there. And so who knows? Let us speculate.
That's why we're here, just to speculate. So, so we rented a recording studio between the assistant engineer, the engineer, and the producer. We have all the instruments recorded. We got the perfect takes from all the musicians. So we just have all these audio files. Now, What do we do as the mixing engineer, which is a lot of times the engineer or the producer? What is mixing when it comes to the session? What does that do?
Well, yeah, mixing is taking all of those individual pieces, those individual tracks per song, and making them into one cohesive. You got to go with the technical term, just with into one audio file. That is like, that's the thing that people will listen to. You've got a left channel and a right channel, and that's it. So you take, any number of tracks, 24, 48, 100, 150, who knows. You've got a track for every microphone, that's on the drum kit. You've got multiple vocal tracks, guitar tracks, all this stuff, overdubs. And the mixing engineer balances all that out, adds EQ and compression and effects, and really like forms the final vision of the song into a tangible audio file that goes out to the consumer after the mastering engineer puts that final polish on it.
So when the mixing is done, we have, say, 10 individual songs that each song sounds perfect. We've captured the vision of the musicians, the producer, everything. We have just 10 separate songs as audio files. Now it all has to sound like one product. So we get that to the mastering engineer. And what specifically does the mastering engineer do to gloss it up at the end?
Well, the mastering engineer will take all of those tracks. The producer, the artist will let them know like what the sequence of it is. The mastering engineer will use
So they're putting
EQ
the
and-
songs in order of how it
Yep.
plays when you put in a CD.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Even if you think about if you think about it in terms of digital delivery, streaming, or purchasing MP3s or waves or whatever, they will they'll put them in order and determine the space in between songs. Some songs mold right into each other. So where does one end and the other begin in terms of a file or a kind of like a marker point on your iTunes or whatever. So it's a very technical process, but it's also an artistic process. In that they just do the final, I always use the analogy of like you're building a piece of furniture. When you're recording it, you're chiseling the wood and sawing it and forming it and kind of getting all the pieces together, and you've got it in a rough assembly. And then the mixing engineer bolts it all together, sands it down, puts a coat of lacquer on it, or puts a coat of stain on it, makes it look real nice. The mastering engineer then takes it and goes, just a little rough spot here, it's a little rough spot there. Now I'm going to put a clear coat over it and make it nice and shiny.
They wrap it in all the bubble for the movers to come and pick it up as well.
There you go. Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to add to your metaphor, so I had to add in some bubble tape or something.
I'll take that. I'll accept that. Absolutely. They bubble wrap it up and send it off to digital distribution or make it ready to do that. Yeah. Yeah. I guess that's how I understand it.